on to our other top focus in this edition. Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India has thanked Russian President Vladimir Putin for inviting him for that informal meeting in the Russian city of Sochi. The informal summit allowed India and Russia to reinforce their close bilateral ties. Prime Minister Modi, in fact, described Russia as an old friend. Both leaders commit themselves to evolving a new dimension, as they called it, in trade, defense and diplomatic ties.
Let me thank you for...
लंबे अरसे से भारत और रशिया एक अटूट मित्र रहे। लगातार हमारे बायलैटरल मीटिंग होती रहती है, लेकिन मैं राष्ट्रपति पुतिन का बहुत आभारी हूं कि उन्होंने एक इनफॉर्मल समिट के रूप में, इनफॉर्मल मीटिंग के रूप में मुझे निमंत्रित किया और इसलिए इतने लंबे कालखंड में एक नया आयाम हमारे संबंधों में जुड़ा। लगातार आपसे बार बार मिलने का मौका मिला है, साथ बैठ करके सोचने का अवसर मिला है और मिल बैठ करके दोनों देश आगे बढ़े उसके लिए प्रयास करने का सौभाग्य मिला। मुझे भी पिछले 4 साल से आपके साथ कंधे से कंधा मिला करके चलने का अवसर मिला है। हर बायलैटरल रिलेशन हो, अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संबंधों की बात हो, खुल करके हमने विचार विमर्श किया है और विश्वास के साथ आगे बढ़ने का हम दोनों को अवसर मिला और इसके लिए मैं खूब खुशी व्यक्त करता हूँ।
All right, let's broaden this up. Joining us here in the studios is former diplomat Arun Singh. Ambassador, thanks very much for joining us here. Also joining us from Moscow is Dmitry Babish, political analyst. Let me begin by coming to you first, Ambassador, on what, according to you, have been the key takeaways from the way these talks have panned out so far. We've had those spectacular visuals, again, of those two leaders engaging in those informal talks on the yacht. Something which, of course, reminds us of the stroll that was undertaken by Indian Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Informality, it seems, is the flavor of the month.
Informality is important. It gives the leaders an opportunity to spend some time with each other, talking over issues in substance, in greater detail, so that they build greater understanding amongst each other. And this is important when things around them are changing rapidly. At one level, the India-Russia relationship is well established. Prime Minister Modi and President Putin have met several times. And so one could argue what is the need after that for a detailed informal interaction. But there's a lot of change happening in the global situation. US foreign policy seems to be evolving. US relations with Europe is evolving. The US-China relationship is seeing a lot of volatility. And there's a lot of tension in the US-Russia relationship. There's ferment in West Asia, which is an area very critical for India. So in the midst of all this, how do we want to take the India-Russia relationship forward in a medium and longer term framework? So I think it is useful for the leaders to have that understanding, because President Putin has just been re-elected for his 4th term.
Yes.
He's got 6 years to go and he has a lot of influence in Russia. So it would be useful to understand how he visualizes Russia's role in the world and the Russia-India relationship so that we take it forward. So I think it's important in that framework.
All right, Dmitry, let me come to you also on the various issues that have been speculated upon that are being, of course, discussed threadbare between the two leaders. One among them being the US withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement. According to the speculation, that also was one of the triggers to the extent of Russia's invitation to the Indian leader for those talks. According to you, what would Russia hope to achieve at the end of these talks?
Well, I think Russia wants good relations with both India and China. This may appear a difficult task to achieve, but I think it is achievable if your policy is predictable. It's one of the peculiarities of our epoch that the countries that always prided themselves on humanistic, predictable policy, the United States and the European Union, they're basically becoming more and more unpredictable. Look what's going on now between Mr. Trump and the European Union. There is a real conflict. And the reason is that the policy of sanctions, which the United States and the European Union used quite willingly against Russia, against Yugoslavia, against Iraq, Now Mr. Trump is using this policy against the European Union. Look what he said, when he said that those companies of the EU countries which will continue to trade with Iran, the US sanctions may be extended on them. So this is a completely new situation, and I think many countries in the world are now rethinking their attitude to what is still called the global West, and there is more understanding for Russia's position. So I think what Mr. Putin wanted to achieve as a result of his meeting with Prime Minister Modi, it was not just a few important economic agreements, even though important agreements were signed, including one on the Russian-built nuclear plant in Tamil Nadu. The other important thing is kind of philosophical agreement with the Indian leader on what's going on in the world right now, especially on the actions of the United States and the European Union.
Right. Let's also take a step back, Ambassador, and the broader framework under which the Indo-Russia relationship has really worked, going back to 2000, and something that the Indian Prime Minister today also invoking Atal Bihari Vajpayee while talking about solidifying the Indo-Russia relationship. There's several ups and downs, to say the least, that the relationship has gone through. If you look at the graph overall, what according to you have been the peaks in that relationship?
In his meeting with President Putin, the Prime Minister had made extensive references to the year 2000.
Yes.
The year when President Putin had visited India, and the year when the two countries had made a declaration on strategic partnership. And that was very critical because we had earlier developed a certain comfort in the Indo-Soviet relationship, and the peak of which had been in the 1971 conflict, when the Soviet Union had stood firmly with India when we had come under some pressure from the West. But once the Soviet Union was dissolved in 1991, there was a lot of concern as to how the new Russia would want to define its relationship with India. The new Russia in the early 90s wanted to build a relationship with the West because it felt that the West, the political and economic system of the West, had been the victor in the Cold War, and they wanted to follow as much as possible that system and emerged from where they were. After some time, I think there was a sense there that the West was not prepared to integrate Russia fully. There was NATO expansion, there was expansion of the European Union, and they started looking at the relationship with their traditional partners differently. It was then that President Putin in 2000, in his first year as president, visited India. And so that's really started laying the basis for the new relationship. Since then, there have been annual summits, 18 such summits have been held. And in 2010, again when President Putin had visited India, the two countries declared a special and privileged strategic partnership. And the reason for that is that in terms of defense cooperation, our cooperation with Russia is the most extensive. Even today, although we are widening our options, more than 60% of our defense inventory comes from Russia. We get certain areas of critical technology that we have not got from anywhere else.
Right.
If you look at the BrahMos missile, nuclear-powered, leasing of nuclear-powered submarines, and there are many such examples. Russia has also provided political support to India, including at the United Nations, when it has been critical for us. So there is factoring in of all that, and it is on that basis that our relationship with Russia, clearly from our point of view, is a factor of stability as we pursue our national security interests. And we need to keep that in mind even as we widen our options and deepen relationships with the United States, with European countries and others.
And safe to say that India seems to be caught in the crosshairs in the midst of the US sanctions, whether it's Russia, whether it's Iran. India, of course, caught in that spot as well. But that also brings us to the next point of, if I can take that across to Dimitri on that. Dimitri, the talk of the US sanctions when it comes to the defense ties, when it comes to Russia. How worried is Moscow, and would it be safe to say that that is one of the reasons that have brought the two leaders together today?
Initially, Russia did not want a confrontation with the United States. The ambassador quite rightly said that in the early 90s and even in the first years of Putin's rule, Russia tried to build a very good relationship with the West. We even forgot some of our old partners in the Middle East. There was less emphasis on relations with China, with India. Now we understand that this was a very vain hope. Basically, again, the ambassador is quite right. The West is not prepared to integrate Russia, and the last few years have shown that the United States and the European Union are unfortunately following the same globalist ideology, and inside this ideology, Russia and China are viewed as enemies. The other big countries, such as India and Brazil, are also treated with suspicion simply because these are big, successful countries which sooner or later may challenge the world order which is being built by the elites in the United States and in the European Union. So initially Russia was very unhappy about the sanctions. The Russian leaders have pointed to the fact that these sanctions were not agreed by the UN Security Council, that they're illegal in fact. But obviously now we have kind of calmed down. We have seen the sanctions are going to be with us for many years. So actually some sanctions had a good impact on the Russian economy, because instead of just exporting oil and gas to Europe, as we did for many years, the Russian leaders now are developing our own country. They're looking for markets inside Russia, and they're looking for new partners, including India. That's why this meeting was so important. Let me remind you that it's not only the nuclear power plants that Russia is building in India. We have huge military cooperation. India is the biggest buyer of weapons after China. Also, I think obviously Russia wants to kind of diversify, you know.
Right. All right. We're going to leave it there for the moment. Dimitri Babish and Ambassador Arun Singh, appreciate indeed very much you're joining us on the broadcast with all of those perspectives and details.